Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great Wednesday so far. My name is Mary Angie Carbiles, and I'm the Meetings and Events Coordinator for the Houston Association of Realtors. Before I introduce to you our guest speakers today, I just wanted to go over some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording to the webinar will be sent out to you via email within the next week, so be on the lookout for that. Also, if you have any questions for either of their speakers, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A, and we will ask the questions after the presentation. And now I'm going to introduce today's speakers. First, let's start with Brian Rushton. Brian has been involved in the real estate industry since 1976, affiliating with the Century 21 Network in 1980 as a franchise in the Atlantic Canada, and then moving to the Century 21 corporate environment in Vancouver, British Columbia in 1984. Brian's direct responsibilities are the day-to-day management of the Century 21 brand in Canada, with particular focus on all operational strategic growth initiatives. Century 21 Canada currently has 400 locations and over 10,000 network members operating throughout the Canada marketplace. Welcome, Brian. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you.
Now it's time to introduce Jeremy Conway. Jeremy is HR's strategic architect. In that position, he's responsible for monitoring and researching the current events, circumstances, and directions of the North American real estate industry. Jeremy is also responsible for generating HR's annual objective for the board of director approval, and then coordinating the implementation of those objectives. Jeremy's industry clients include many of the leading top industry leaders and decision makers. Thank you for being here with us today, Jeremy.
Well, thank you, Mary Angie. And let me add my appreciation for those of you who have joined us for this latest segment of the Global Summer Series. It's a special pleasure for me today to appear with Brian because he and I have been friends for about 20 years, and he is one of the great critical thinkers of the Canadian real estate industry. If you go back and look at the events that have happened over the past decade, Brian has been behind many of those, and is a great leader and a great executive and a good friend. And I'm looking forward to finding something he misses so I can ask questions today. So without further ado, Brian, would you share with us your knowledge about how to work with American or Canadian clients in the U.S.?
All right, thank you. Mary Angie, Jeremy, thank you very much for that introduction. There's probably a few more stories that Jeremy would have that we can't share online here. So we'll just kind of avoid those. But anyway, it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon and to talk a little bit about Canadian buyers in the U.S. marketplace. This obviously is a bit of a strange year to maybe be talking about it, just because we currently have our borders are closed so that Canadians really can't visit and Americans can't come across the borders at this particular point either as such. However, that's not going to last forever. We'll come through this, so hopefully this will be a little bit of an educational process for you. Got a few slides I just want to share with you today. Kind of here's what the topics that I would like to cover. And as Mary Angie said, if you have any questions, just you can put them in the chat and we'll address those at the end. Jeremy has a habit of interrupting on the way through, so we'll let him do that just because he's an important person. But in any event, these are the topics I'm going to cover, and I'm going to jump right into it. We're going to try to keep this to maybe 30 minutes or thereabouts, just because most of us realtors, and I still classify myself as a realtor, I have attention spans of about 7 minutes. So I think that we have to kind of move right along quickly. First of all, educating the Canadians on what's taking place in the U.S. market. And I think this is not unlike anything if you've got a referral coming in or clients coming in from any other marketplace, whether that be Miami or Boston or wherever it might be, into the Houston market or into the Texas market. I think the education process is probably a little more critical with a Canadian buyer, just because there's a lot of rules and regulations, a lot of things that are done differently in the US than they are in Canada. Yes, we all are in the real estate business and we help buyers and sellers move their properties, but there are a number of kind of idiosyncrasies that belong to each of the countries. There's a brochure here that's online, and you'll see the, I won't bother clicking through to all the pages, but this will be, Mary Angie is going to provide you these links as well. This is a brochure that was put out by the Royal Bank of Canada, which actually operate in the US as well as RBC. And they do some pretty creative things as it relates to financing, as well as information that for buyers, especially for Canadian buyers buying in the US market. So it's something you may want to have a look at. They're pretty proactive in the US market as well. And they do online applications. So it's a pretty seamless sort of process. So you may want to have a look at some of the things they have available, because I think educating any buyer coming into a marketplace, but especially from a foreign country, is probably important to the overall scope of what you want to accomplish, which obviously is to make a sale. This particular one, interesting. This is another one that's put out by RBC, and if you have time, you might want to go to this right after this particular webinar, because just as it's good timing on this thing, they're starting a series of webinars today, actually at 1 o'clock your time, which is all about educating on Canadian buyers for US purchases. And they've got a series, and you can scroll down here and you can register for these. There's, I think, a series of 8 different programs that they're putting on between now and the end of September on what to expect, and kind of helping to educate the Canadian buyer in the marketplace. So again, RBC being a mortgage company, as well as a big bank, one of the big 5 banks in Canada, obviously they're interested in the business. However, they're providing a good service as it relates to not only the webinars, but the information they're providing on their brochures as well. So it might be something that you might want to take advantage of. And of course, all those webinars are free. The Realtor Relationship, and this is really important, I think, as it relates to working with a Canadian buyer. And yes, the Realtor Relationship is important with any buyer, but I think you really need to think about hand-holding a little more seriously with a Canadian buyer, or probably any foreign buyer in your marketplace. As I said earlier, there's different things that take place with inspections and termite inspections and a whole bunch of other things that in many cases we're not accustomed to in the Canadian marketplace. As such, there's certainly different processes that you have to go through as it relates, depending on where you're buying in your country, different processes to go through as it relates to completing the purchase and time frames and a number of things. So I think that the more you can establish rapport with your Canadian consumer, Canadian customer, the better off you'll be. And I think that, you probably do that as good realtors. You would probably do that with any referral or anybody coming into your marketplace. But I guess I'm just kind of focusing a little more on the attention to detail, because a lot of the things that we kind of take for granted every day might be foreign to the Canadian buyer as well. The buyer profile is interesting. This is put out by the National Association of Realtors in the US, and of course we're part of that structure through our Canadian Real Estate Association as well. It just so happens I clicked on this link this morning and found out that NAR had just updated it to the 2020 stats. You'll see, if you go into this link, you'll see that they're updated. The 77.9 billion that was last year's number has reduced a little bit. It's down to about 74 billion. That's still a ton of money, obviously, that's being spent in the U.S. marketplace by foreign buyers. And you'll see Canada is number 2 there, behind China. What I'm not clear on, and something that probably if we dug a little further into the NAR report, I think you might find more of the Canadian buyers are owner-occupiers of properties. I know that certainly in Canada, we have many Chinese investors that are more investor type than they are actually owner occupiers. So, however, your National Association of Realtors does a great job at putting this information together every year. Obviously, it just kind of comes out in July, August. So the 2020 stats are there for you to review as well. And it's great to have an association that puts that information together. This cash or credit is kind of it's an interesting one. Most Canadian buyers up until this point when they buy in the US or any foreign country, they normally are paying cash. And what they do is most Canadian buyers that are investing in the US will have reasonable equity in their homes or savings. Probably the vast majority of the buyers are 55-year-old plus, so they've done well in business or in their employment, or they've saved well for retirement. And quite often they will have cash in the bank, or they will finance their property in Canada and take that cash and use it to purchase something in the US. That is changing just a little bit. The interesting part is that the Canadian dollar, generally speaking, should be running about 20 to 25 cents less than your dollar, the US dollar. In recent years, it's actually slipped up over 30% and is now close to 35 and actually might be 35.5 right now. That's a pretty big hit. So when you talk about, buying a $500,000 property or $1 million property and adding another 35% on top of it just to exchange your money, that's a pretty significant hit. So a lot of Canadians have now investigated how they can finance property in the US so that they don't have to take that big hit right now. The dollar will move around some. So, what's important here is that they always get a mortgage on the property in the US that's open so they can pay it off at any time. There have been times in the past, as recent as 2008, 9, 10, that the Canadian dollar actually was worth more than the US dollar. So that's when a Canadian buyer would obviously cash out and use their own Canadian cash to pay for their property. Again, RBC in the US have done a good job at educating the consumer on how to use their services, as well as being able to have no prepayment penalties if you want to pay it down quickly. So again, when you go through that brochure, if you do that, you'll see a couple of links there that'll take you to their site as it relates to that as well. So the closing process is, and it says here on the buyers and sellers and even real estate professionals get nervous about real estate closings, and that's certainly the case in many cases. That is, the closing process is quite complex in the U.S. compared to what it is in Canada, and I don't say that to be negative. It's just that there's a lot more forms and a lot more processes that we have to go through in the U.S. that we're not really accustomed to in the Canadian marketplace. We have a different land registry system here in Canada. It's not uncommon to buy a house on a Friday and have it close on a Monday. It can happen that quick. A little different in most of the US states. I actually have gone through a purchase in the state of California. I've not bought anything in Texas, but I have gone through a purchase in the state of California. And even myself as a veteran realtor was probably a little bit flabbergasted with the amount of paperwork that had to be processed and so on and so forth. But I think it's important to educate the Canadian on the closing process so that there's no missteps at the end, making sure they get their money into escrow and doing all the things that you have to do to satisfy your regulations in your particular jurisdiction as well. This is there's many sites out there that you can point them to. This is one that I personally like just because it's very straightforward. Again, the link is there provided for you if you think that's of any interest to you. An important thing for a Canadian to know is the U.S. and the Canadian tax implications of buying real estate in the U.S. And many Canadians and probably even many realtors probably don't have a good handle on how that should be done. I think that it's important probably to try to educate your people prior to the closing as opposed to after the fact, because there's certain ways you can set up your purchase that you're not going to have to pay taxes in both countries. And there's one thing that we don't like to do is normally pay taxes. We certainly don't want to pay taxes in two different countries as such. The other thing is this is actually for providing for your heirs. So if you again, a retired couple buying a property in Texas or on the beach or wherever it might be, probably they're going to leave it to their family, to their kids or to their grandchildren at some particular point. And I think that that's a caution as well. how you set it up in the purchase is important. And it's not that it can't be done later, it can be. It's just that you've got to go back through the steps again to accommodate that. So again, there's a site here that kind of gives you some ideas and some hints on what you could provide to your Canadian buyer to help them through that. One of the things that I did, and this was a personal thing that I did as well, is set up what is referred to as a cross-border trust. And the advantage of setting up a cross-border trust is you still have all the rights of homeownership. It's recognized in the U.S. in all 50 states. It is endorsed by NAR, and also the banks have no problem dealing with it from a mortgage point of view as well. And basically what it is it's a trust. The trust never dies. So if the whole idea is that instead of it being in Jeremy's personal name, he puts it into a trust that potentially he and his spouse can manage. They can leave this to their children, and the trust just continues on. Because what happens if it's in a personal name, if a Canadian buys a property in Texas in a personal name, and if for whatever reason the Canadian dies and leaves that property to their heirs, it automatically triggers about a 30 to 35% tax bracket for the heirs taking that property over. So it's nice to leave a property in Texas to your kids, but they probably won't appreciate getting a tax bill from the U.S. government for 35% of the value. So all of a sudden if it's $1 million property or $500,000 property, that's a pretty significant hit. This is one way to avoid that. Again, you can set it up, and the trust is basically set up similar to how a will is set up, in the fact that you can will it to your children. And again, the trust never dies, so it never triggers the tax. And that's important. Another big difference between Canadian real estate holdings and U.S. holdings is in a home ownership situation in Canada, we do not pay tax on the equity that we build up. So it's a little different in most of the U.S. states. And I won't go into that detail because that does vary from one state to another. But this is something, and again, the link is here. If you'd like to have a look, that, for instance, it's probably well worth the money. It costs about $5,000 to set up a cross-border trust. It has to go through a legal firm, obviously, that specializes in that. But it's probably $5,000 well spent in preparing for what may take place down the road. One thing that's very important to Canadians is our medical and health program. As you may be aware, Canadians pay a very high income tax rate in Canada, and for that we have a number of things that are built in to our system, and one of those is healthcare and medical insurance. And I think that they pay for it all through their employment or all through their careers. They obviously don't want to lose that. So the whole idea is that they need to be aware of what kind of insurance will carry forward into the U.S., how long they can stay in the U.S. to make sure that medical insurance still covers as well. And generally speaking, I always classify it as a Canadian can spend 6 months minus a day in the U.S. and everything is fine. If they spend any more time than that, a couple of things trigger. Their medical and health insurance could lapse on them. And the other thing that triggers, if you get to 183 days, the U.S. government say, okay, we want tax if you're going to spend that much time here. So again, it's back to this tax situation. So we need to be careful of that. And again, I don't expect any realtors to be professionals to the point of knowing all the ins and outs of this. But I think it's another thing just to kind of guide your clients, guide your potential customers to help them through that process as well. There's a travel insurance guide here I put in as well. They've just updated this to include the COVID-19 coverage, which is obviously very important. So when the borders do open back up again, and Canadians can go south or go to wherever their U.S. properties are, they will want to know that they're covered for anything, including COVID-19, because of course that's been a significant impact on both of our countries as well as around the world, obviously. So that's important. This is an association called the Canadian Snowbird Association. I've belonged to this for many years, and I think it's a great opportunity to stay in touch with what's going on. They represent interests of us snowbirds, so people that go to the U.S., especially in the winter months, to a warmer climate, whether that be Florida or Texas or Arizona or wherever it might be. This is something that if you're serious about working with buyers from the Canadian marketplace, for $25 a year, and that's Canadian dollars, so that's about a Starbucks coffee for you guys down there. But you can belong to this association. They have a pretty extensive website, which I've put the link to there. It talks about what protections that Canadians need as it relates to insurances, as it relates to COVID-19, as it relates to where they're going in the U.S. and so on and so forth. And it is a true association. They've been around for quite a few years. They represent both Canadians and Americans. But again, a realtor looking to do business with Canadian buyers, I think it'd be well worth $25 a year to join this membership, and at least you're kind of on a front row seat as it relates to some of the things that happen. I've put a page in here for resources, all the things that we've talked about, plus a couple more. I think Mary Angie is going to provide you a link or provide this presentation as well, so that these, you don't have to go searching for these, they're right here. Again, I have no particular personal interest in any of these, other than they're good information channels that I think it would provide a good vehicle for you to educate yourself on what a Canadian might be looking at. But also you might want to share those links with any of your Canadian buyers as such. So anyway, that's there for you. Yeah, and there you go. Now this is an opportunity. If you've got any questions, Mary Angie is ready to take those, I think. And I wanted to, as I said earlier, I wanted to keep this as brief as possible because there might be some specific questions that you have that Jeremy or myself could handle. Mary Angie?
Absolutely. If you have any questions, please write it down in the chat. I know a few people were wondering if Brian would share his PowerPoint. He is sharing his PowerPoint with me, and I will share it with all of you along with a video recording of this session, and we will send it to you via email within the next week when it's ready.
Excellent.
If you have any questions, just let us know. Jeremy, you have any specific questions for Brian?
Jeremy, you're on mute. It's not your first rodeo. No, you're still on mute.
So I had the Mounties go through your car while you were speaking, but I didn't find anything. So I recall, it's been my privilege to work with clients in Canada for much of the past 20 years. But the moment I remember the most was when one of the kind Toronto brokers took me aside after a meeting and sort of gave me a talking to about the fact that Canadians are very, very conscious of respect, very conscious of what Americans sometimes, I think we called it the ugly American back in the 1950s when that particular book came out. So could you provide us with just some insight on what are some of the behaviors that Americans might naturally lead into that wouldn't be very productive in a relationship with a Canadian client?
I think yeah, good question. I think and you know, we get us Canucks, you know, I think it's kind of a fond sort of joke that, you know, we're kind people or we're gentle and you can't push us around, or you can push us around and we're not aggressive. And yeah, I guess maybe compared to downtown New York or something, we might be a little more passive as such. But I think that the relationship is certainly the key ingredient here. And I think that any realtor working with a Canadian buyer, it's so important to build that relationship as such. Mary Angie, I just noticed a screen that disappeared here. Did you do that, or does that?
Yes, just wanted to share that Brian Big. And I do have a question coming in for Brian. When they want to sell or buy, does the foreign tax apply? What about FERTA?
What about, I'm sorry, the last part?
FIRPTA.
Uh,
FIRPTA.
I'm not familiar with that term. Jeremy, can you help me on that term?
I
Or
probably can't. As a matter of fact,
that
is it a tax enactment?
Yes.
if I'll just answer the first part of that, Barry Angie. If they buy or sell, I guess the question is when they sell the property, does the tax jump in at that particular point? And if it is set up just in your personal name, then yes. Would you sell a U.S. property, a Canadian selling a U.S. property would have to pay tax to the U.S. government. Again, the advantage of the trust is that you can sell a trust as well. And that's something that's that a little more complicated, but it is possible. But I'm not familiar with that last term that you mentioned there, so I don't know what that is.
So another thing, Brian, the maybe whoever asked that question could give us some. Oh, here it is. It's the foreign. What is it, Mary Angie?
It's the Foreign Investment in Real Estate Property Tax Act.
Is that something that is applicable just in Texas or
in the U.S.?
In the U.S., yeah, okay. I'm not familiar with that particular one because it's being bought. Most of the real estate that Canadians will buy will be used for their personal enjoyment. And I know that in Canada, we have a foreign buyer tax as well, and that varies from one province to the other. However, if it's for your personal enjoyment, that's reduced substantially. And again, I'm not familiar enough. I do apologize about Texas rules and regulations. So you may want to check something from a legal point of view that would be a little more specific to that.
So I have another question asking, as a Canadian who lives in the US, if I want to sell my property in Canada to buy a house in here, is there any tax on the capital gain for me? He's a US resident.
Reversing the situation, yeah. If the property is a personal residence, if you are working in Canada, if you've got a visa to work in Canada, and you've got a personal property that you're owner occupying, then there's potentially a capital gains tax, but it's only based on 50% of the equity of the home. And it's at a lower rate. It's about 20% or 25%. If it's strictly a second home, then yes, it does trigger the capital gains in Canada as well. But you would only have to pay it in Canada. You wouldn't have to pay it in the U.S.
So, Brian, as a recent purchaser of a property in California, in your opinion, what would be the worst mistake an American realtor might make when working with a Canadian consumer? You mentioned several things, but what's the real crowning glory?
I think that kind of, and it would be maybe not any different for regardless of where the buyer is coming from, is taking for granted that they know what they're doing. And I think that a lot of people, yeah, some of us have bought and sold many properties over the years as such, but I think the vast majority of people don't go through this every 2 years. You know, it's every once in a while. So I think if the Texas realtor is just kind of taking for granted that the Canadian knows what they're doing, they must know what they're doing. They're arriving with a pocket full of cash to buy a $500,000 house or whatever. I would say that would be the worst mistake, because then you get to a closing, the thing blows up, or it doesn't close, or whatever the case might be. So knowing the customer is just as important, and probably more important if they're coming from a foreign country rather than just a different state, right?
Perhaps the term snowbird, common in my community as well, might answer this. But is there a prime season for U.S. real estate purchases by Canadians? Is there
I'd have to have a look at that in our because I think they do break that down. I think generally speaking, you will find the tire kickers will be there in the winter and the spring. Everybody gets excited about they go to Florida, or they go to a sunny place in Texas, beach somewhere, or California, And they get all excited and they spend half their holiday looking at property and bugging realtors to take them to open houses or whatever. That's kind of the tire kicking season. I think the ones that are serious about buying real estate, in my particular case, I chose the summer months to go to Palm Springs. And Mary Angie told me it was 108 in Houston today or yesterday. And I've been in Palm Springs when it's been 120 buying homes, but that's the season I think that they should be doing it. If I was counseling any Canadians going to Florida or going to Arizona or Texas or California, don't do it when everybody else is there. Do your research when you're there, obviously, and get into the market in late summer, early fall. And I think that probably works out reasonably well for everybody.
Does the Canadian economy, you have a sense, or you gave us a sense that the Canadians who buy property in the United States tend to already be successful. So that would suggest then that the Canadian economy or its relative wealth at any given time doesn't have a lot to do with the Canadian customer. They're already there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that the economy and the Canadian economy has done quite reasonably well, even in the face of COVID-19. The same as the American economy to some degree. Yeah, we've got our challenges with restaurants not being fully opened and bars and so on and so forth, and we're witnessing that all over the North American continent, probably most of the world at this particular point. But I think generally speaking, the people that you're going to be dealing with to buy homes in Texas from Canada are going to be people that have already got cash in their pocket, right? I mean, they've done well, whether they've worked hard, a husband and wife who worked hard, put a bunch of money away, were good savers, or whether they've done very well with other investments, or whether they've capitalized on the equity that their homes have gained in Canada. And that's another thing is that, prices of homes, we continue to say real estate is always the best investment, regardless of what type of a market you're in. And that certainly has been the case for many of us, where we've cashed out equities that we've built up over the years. So again, to answer your question, Jeremy, I think that the Canadian economy certainly has an impact from a press point of view, from a public relations point of view. Does a Canadian buyer get the jitters if all of a sudden the dollar, is now 40 cents less than the US dollar? Yeah, they might have some concern about that. But if they're motivated to do it, they're going to do it anyway, right? It's like they're just going to make it happen because they have the money and they've made the plan to do it.
So I don't have any further questions, but in parting, I want to make one other comment. Marlene and I have a property in Florida, and half of our neighbors are from Canada. And I just say they are fun people. They're really great. They have great attitudes. They're just fun to spend time with. So we're certainly welcoming that. Mary Angie?
I do not see any other questions coming in. So thank you so much for both Jeremy and Brian for joining us here today for this summer series.
It was a pleasure to be on your series, Mary Angie, and I know you're going to share the presentation. My contact details are on the presentation as well, both email and address, I believe, and phone number. If anyone has any specific questions, I'd love to hear from you. And if I can be of any further service, we've and I'm not here to promote Century 21, the brand, at this particular point, but we do operate across the country. We have over 10,000 network members in all provinces. As such, something that we haven't talked about is how you connect with other realtors and how you get the Canadian buyers as well. And that might be something that you might want to chat about as well. So whether you're with a network or whether you're with an independent organization, obviously NAR work in association with the Canadian Real Estate Association, which we call CREA, and that's a good place to start as well. And maybe if I could do one more little plug again is you've invited me to participate with this particular program, and at some particular point, it might be a good idea to maybe reverse the roles and say, how about have some Americans come to Canada and buy some real estate, because you automatically get a 35% discount because of your money right now. So in any event, we've got lots of land up here. We've got lots of oceanfront property. We have great skiing, and not all of us drive snowmobiles to work, so don't worry about that part. So in any event, Mary Angie, it's been a pleasure. Jeremy, it's always a pleasure to see you. And if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Perfect.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Mary Angie.
All right,
And
thanks.
I just want to remind everyone that the International Advisory Group is offering a CIPS course. If you want to become a CIPS certificate, please visit the hr.com website/education and sign up today. The dates are October 26th to the 30th, and it's a 5-day course, and you will not regret taking it. It's very beneficial for international sales. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a great Wednesday.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.